Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first this week for our two games is 1994's Super Street Fighter II Turbo, the fifth and final updated version, in the decade at least, of the fighting game that revolutionized the genre forever.
Following that is the second entry in legendary arcade developer SNK's 3v3 crossover fighter, 1995's The King of Fighters 95.
Yeah, I was almost going to say, I wonder what year that game came out.
That's a mystery. No one knows.
So obviously, aside from these both being iconic fighting games, it seems that the easiest way that you could play these games today would be on Nintendo Switch releases that came out in 2017.
Yeah, which is really weird that they both happened in the same year.
I was looking through the research for just Street Fighter 2 in general, and I had forgotten about Ultra Street Fighter 2, but that was a thing, and that is still Switch exclusive, so that's wild.
Yeah, I actually forgot about that too. You can find like physical copies of that in stores still.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's I see it when I go to Best Buy and stuff. It's weird.
Well, Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
I had a review game called Welcome to Elk, and it's a game about stories, and it's really heavy, but also really funny and very cheerful. It's weird. It's a really weird game, but I very much liked it. Its ending is also super weird. And also, I spent my time not playing that, playing Pokemon, and I did roll credits in Legends Arceus.
Let's go.
And it's a good game. I've taken it out of the Switch for now so that I don't just go perfect every Pokedex entry, because I know I will do that if I let myself. But it's probably going to stick around as a game that's like, I had an hour to kill. Why don't I just go catch some stuff? It's really good. I really, really like it.
I can't believe how good it is. I think I'm 5 to 6 hours into it. I just went into the second big area of the game, cleared that Cleavor quest and all that. I am halfway between 3-star and 4-star. So I'm getting there, and I'm doing dumb things like catching Pokemon that are well above my level, and it's stupid fun, and it makes for some good power leveling. My team's like kind of all around level 29, and like I went back in the first area kind of along like the high areas near the rock tunnel there, the Orberg tunnel. Mm-hmm. And like I think I kind of cheesed it riding Weirdeer, and like, oh, there's Machoke. Catch, throw. It's level 43. I'm sorry. Like,
especially if you walk into like the distortion zones, and a level 60 Mr. Mime just steps out and destroys you, and you're level 10 Starly.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can only do level 40 for obeying right now, so it's interesting. And then I tried taking on the Alpha Heracross there, which I know is one of your boys.
Yeah, I caught the hell. It's so big. It's so big.
It's so big, and I was trying to like throw spoiled apricorns at it to like get its defense down, and then go behind it to throw heavy balls at it. And like I was dodging its attacks all well and good, but I ran out of like all the spoiled apricorns, and after 2 tries to catch it, it did not work. So alas, I'll have to come back to him later.
Yeah, I think I was in the third area when I got to go back and catch my giant beetle son. I have a picture on my Twitter of my final team, and like he's sitting in the background and he towers over everything else except Gardevoir. The only reason he doesn't tower over that Gardevoir, which is also an alpha, is because she is sitting down.
Aha. Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, I cannot believe how good that game is, and I'm going to be playing it for a while, which is wild because Horizon Forbidden West is out in a week as of time of recording. It's out in a few days as of time this episode is out and in your ears. So that is crazy. 2022 is already zooming along for games.
And I also played 2 more very short games. Very, very deeply weird games, but probably now reflecting on them might be some of my favorites. Like they might end up on that list. It is the 15-minute visual novel, Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk, and its sequel, the around an hour long Milk Outside a Bag of Milk Outside a Bag of Milk. They are psychological horror visual novels, but like with this weird take where you are playing as both the inner monologue as well as possibly medication inside the brain of somebody that is deeply unwell for reasons you never fully learn about. But it's just aesthetically really, really well done. And you can buy both of these games for pretty cheap. So I would recommend that if that's the kind of game that you're into. It was up my alley so hard.
It did seem like your kind of game for sure, though. Strange to look at just a screenshot on Twitter, though.
Yeah. It's a weird, weird game, but aesthetically just give it to me. Feed me. It's beautiful.
Let's talk about some composer follow-up news. I'd like to talk about headlines from the video game industry of the past week or so and how they tie into games. We've talked about composers. We've talked about if those composers are still doing work inside, outside the game industry, whatever. The big news story this past week in the video game industry was one of the 3 big Nintendo Directs that usually seem to happen in a year. They get one in the beginning of the year, kind of around this time in February. They get the big E3 one in June, and then one kind of around September-ish at least. And boy, this Nintendo Direct did not disappoint, Joe.
Boy, didn't it. It was the most, like, just winner after winner after winner volleyball demo. Winner. It brought it hard for the first Direct of the year. Like, hot damn.
Pretty amazing. As far as games that we've generally talked about before on the show, opening up with Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, basically doing the Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, but involving the characters from Fire Emblem 3 Houses to do a side story, alternate universe story, what have you, for a Musou that is based on Fire Emblem. It's one of the things where you could have easily predicted it, and yet nobody did. Well, nobody except John Cartwright, but that's a whole other thing. So that comes out June 24th. Mario Strikers Battle League comes out June 10th. Amazing how we talked about Mario Strikers Charged a couple months ago, it feels like at least. And it's like, oh, who knows if we'll ever have that happen? Well, it's a World Cup year. And sure enough, we're getting Mario Strikers again on Switch. Amazing. Portal Companion Edition comes out in 2022. That's, involves Portal and Portal 2. Good to see those on Switch.
Genuinely did not expect those to ever show up on Switch because of Valve.
Yeah.
But also, though, I'm going to need to see a price point on that, because you can get both of those games on Steam for essentially free now.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Oddly enough, when we're talking about like weird third-party ports, that whole Batman Arkham collection would have been a thing where it's like, oh, that would have made sense to show up at the Direct with all the leaks and ESRB ratings and whatnot. No, not yet. Earthbound is coming to Nintendo Switch Online. That's out now, actually. Joe, thoughts on Earthbound?
Yeah, everybody can shut up now. It's on NSO.
No Mother 3 yet, though. Earthbound Beginnings, though. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, probably the biggest story. For $25, you can buy the Booster Course pack. So we're almost going to do like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but with Mario Kart, spreading out 48 tracks in packs over 2 years. That's kind of incredible. It is included with the expansion pass if you have that for Nintendo Switch Online, but $25 for that whole pack is pretty incredible. And that first pack comes out March 18th. And then wrapping things up with Xenoblade Chronicles 3 coming out September 2022. That is sooner than I think a lot of people expected.
Yeah, I know that's been rumored for a really long time, and essentially, like, we know it's happening. We don't know it's happening, but we know it's happening. Yeah, I didn't expect it to be out this year. And for the Mario Kart stuff, I think one of our friends on Twitter, Luke, aka Cyberlink420, he did the math, and it was like, yeah, 48 tracks is almost every track from the entire series.
Wow.
So it's finally time for Waluigi Pinball to be in the HD spotlight. My time is now.
That would be amazing. And also interesting to see how seriously they're taking Mario Kart Tour as far as bringing tracks over from there. So maybe Mario Kart 9 already happened.
The Mario Kart 9 is the friends we made along the way. I don't blame them for not having Mario Kart 9 yet. Why would they when they can just add 48 tracks to Mario Kart 8 and call it good?
No kidding. Save the next big game for the next console and keep making that money on a big install base. This was also the direct where Chrono Cross The Radical Dreamers Edition was announced. Also Live Alive and Nintendo Switch Sports. I guess we'll have to be talking about those games in the future on this show, or at least games related to them.
I am very excited about Live Alive. We have mentioned it on this show before, all the way back in episode 1, because Live Alive was one of Yoko Shimomura's first big projects when she began working for Square. So, never been released in the West. Highly looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to trying Chrono Cross and seeing which side of the coin I live on for that one. Because the only thing I know about Chrono Cross is that people either really, really love it or people really, really hate it. So we'll see. Following that, though, this is less of a fun announcement and more of a, alright. Marty O'Donnell and Mike Salvatore, the composers that have worked on Halo in the past, they claim that Microsoft still owes them money relating to Halo royalties dating back 20 years, and so they are suing the company. Apparently talks have been in the works for over a decade, but now they are taking action. Mediation is expected next week, but if it's not resolved, this could go to court, and that would be rather interesting. And they've also instructed their lawyers to explore the possibility of blocking the release of the upcoming Paramount Plus streaming TV show that, like, just got a bunch of announcements of cast and, like, showing off stuff with a preliminary injunction. So that just might not be happening. Probably a really great thing to happen a few weeks after you just spent a couple $1 billion to buy another company.
It's a weird headline for sure, and I feel like they had to have known that a Halo series or whatever was in the works, right? It's been known for years. I don't know what was involved when Halo property rights were being sold from Bungie to Microsoft and then passed on to 343 Industries. I don't know what goes on with that, but this is something to maybe keep an eye on, although I could just see them easily just settling out and figuring it out from there.
Yeah, I assume this is going to end in settling outside of court.
And lastly here, did you know that there's a band called Control Group? It's a band that Darren Korb is a member of, the audio director and composer over at Supergiant Games. Well, they just released their new album called The Latest Numbers. It's on their Bandcamp, so go check it out there. It's just like one of these things like, did you know Darren Korb was in a band? Had a band?
I sure didn't. I found out because it was posted on Instagram about this album. So, all right.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, but go check that out. All right, let's talk about some fighting games this week. It's not Evo time, but that's still like half a year away. Let's still talk about some fighting games. And we're talking about Street Fighter. We've talked about Street Fighter before on the show. We talked about Street Fighter V Arcade Edition on episode 28. And there was even Street Fighter Cross Mega Man on episode 106. I think it's kind of crazy that we haven't talked about Street Fighter 4 yet. I almost thought we did.
No, I think we've thought about it at least once, but haven't ended up doing it. I imagine one of us will probably bring it whenever the mythological Street Fighter 6 finally gets released.
Yes, that's a good point. But yeah, I think it's strange we haven't brought that up. But honestly, more so that we haven't brought this game up. So let's talk about Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which is complicated because it involves talking about Street Fighter 2 as a whole. I think you'll see it makes sense why we're officially bringing up Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo as far as the soundtrack with how it sounds and how it allows us to talk about certain tracks. But it starts off with Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior being released in arcades in Japan on February 6th, 1991. Then it got released in arcades February 15th. That's today, as of time of episode release, in 1991 in North America, and March 1991 in the rest of the world. A Super Nintendo port of Street Fighter 2 made its way to Japan on June 10th, 1992, North America on July 15th, UK and Australia in October 1992, and the rest of Europe in December. There are a bunch of other ports of the original game, with platforms such as MS-DOS, Amiga, Atari ST, Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, CPS Changer, Game Boy, and Sega Master System. And all of these soundtracks sound different because of how they handle MIDI and their different sound cards and chips and all of that. So there are even plenty more of consoles that got the original Street Fighter 2 as part of it being bundled in Street Fighter Anniversary ports and things like that. So the original Street Fighter 2 is pretty much everywhere. But here is where Street Fighter 2 gets really complicated, because this game is famous for having additional updated versions. Furthermore, within the span of 2 years, Street Fighter 2 would get 4 new versions. So let's break it down and what is different about it. There's first Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, which hit arcades March 1992. So about a year later, it had, some time with Champion Edition. It rebalances characters' power levels. It allows both players in 2-player matches to select the same character, and that was distinguished by alternate costume colors. And it allows players to choose the 4 previously computer-only boss characters. So it added 4 more playable characters. This version would be the first to come to Sega Genesis and Mega Drive, and that would be in September 1993. Then unauthorized arcade modifications started to run rampant, like there was an unofficial Rainbow Edition out there. So Capcom responded with Street Fighter 2 Turbo. It's also called Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting. This was released in arcades in December 1992.
That's when I was born.
Hey, so it is. This was based on the Champion Edition, and it increased the playing speed and gave some characters new special moves. A port to Super Nintendo in summer 1993 would be the first time that platform would receive these new playable boss characters as Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Then, Super Street Fighter 2, The New Challengers, hit arcades in September 1993. Now, this was based on a change and upgrade in Capcom's arcade hardware. See, they had the Capcom Play System, which was their arcade board, essentially. And when you hear talk about, when it comes to Street Fighter 2, when it's CPS 1 versus CPS 2, that's Capcom Play System. And so, with the newer hardware of the CPS 2, it involved improved graphics, improved audio, and more gameplay changes and additions. They also added 4 new characters for Super Street Fighter 2, in addition to the 8 of the original roster, plus the 4 bosses. And this would be the last version of the game that would come to Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis and Mega Drive, and that would be in summer 1994. Super Street Fighter II Turbo, however, would be the final release of the Street Fighter II in the 90s, so to speak. And this allows for a selective game speed. It introduces powered-up special moves called super combos. Oh, interesting, where you build a super meter and you can unleash a super move? And it adds a new hidden character, a boss character, a secret character. This one had 3DO, DOS, Amiga, Dreamcast, and Game Boy Advance ports.
Seeing DOS among that is weird, but shouldn't be surprising, I guess.
Right? Yeah, no kidding. So, in the years since, there have been some wild re-releases, and generally tied with anniversaries and things like that. With Hyper Street Fighter II, the Anniversary Edition, it included all versions of Street Fighter II. And it was in arcades and PlayStation 2 in 2003, and on Xbox in 2004. Super Street Fighter II Turbo HD Remix, released in 2008 on Xbox 360 and PS3. It featured the original game and a high-definition remake version that used graphics that were drawn by Udon Entertainment and arranged music by members of Overclocked Remix.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, I didn't either. That was neat to learn. And as we referred to, Ultra Street Fighter II: The Final Challengers, released for Nintendo Switch exclusively on May 26, 2017, with classic and HD art, some balance tweaks, and 3 new characters, which are basically evil enhanced versions of 3 already existing characters. Overall, for the most part, aside for some Nintendo Game Boy versions, the game is developed and published by Capcom. Street Fighter II, Super Street Fighter II Turbo, it's the 2D fighting game that set the standard for all fighting games to come, where characters use a variety of unique attacks and special abilities to deplete the health bar of their opponent. What is the story? It's super brief because the arcade mode is super brief and not that involved in terms of the story. So the leader of the Shadaloo organization, M. Bison, in his global domination plan, sets up a world fighting tournament to select the best fighters to work in his Shadaloo organization through brainwashing. Basically, whichever fighter you choose, can you foil Shadaloo's efforts? So, Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Super Street Fighter II Turbo?
So I haven't played a lot of Street Fighter II. I, of course, know of it. That and my game this week are both games I have played for Smash Your Pieces, where going into that episode, I was like, I don't feel qualified to talk about this game because I'm not good at fighting games. But I had a lot of fun with, we played the SNES, whichever one was on the SNES, I've already forgotten because there were 500 of them mentioned earlier.
Did it have Cammy in it?
I don't think it did. No, it might have. It was whatever one is on the SNES Classic.
Oh,
specifically. Because that's what we played. That's what we played it through. And it's fun. I really like the soundtrack. Obviously, the soundtrack has connections to my favorite composer in the industry. Street Fighter's cool, and I wish I was good at it or felt like I could say more about it.
So on the SNES Classic is Street Fighter II Turbo Hyper Fighting. So it did not have Cammy and the new, fighting characters there, but it did include the 4 Shadaloo bosses. Okay. Interesting. Good to know. I did not know that. So yeah, I feel like I've only messed around with Street Fighter 2 and barcades and things like that. It's an easy go-to as far as go on a cabinet, mess around. You definitely see the foundations of what fighting games became, and it's super important for how fighting games grew from that. But I am not good at it, so I'll only mess around a couple rounds, probably play Chun-Li or something like that, and not do well. So that's my limited experience with it. Part of why I chose to cover this and just Street Fighter 2 in general finally was mostly just to learn, like, what is the deal with all the versions? What's the deal with the soundtracks? Like, why do I know that there's one version of Guile's theme that is so superior to every other version? The one that is used properly in all of the Guile's theme goes with everything memes. And when other versions are used, it's not the same. I wanted to learn about that. I think I did. And if I can pass that on to you, mission accomplished.
I'll also pick it up at like barcades and go like 2 rounds and realize that I don't know what I'm doing. But I also play Chun-Li when I get it. Cammy if she's there, but mostly Chun-Li.
Yeah. Wow, same. And I'll sometimes mess around with Blanca too, because it's kind of easy just to get some lightning action going there. So when it comes to the characters that are involved in all these extra versions, who got added? Well, you have the original 8 World Warriors from the original Street Fighter 2, and I don't know, it was a challenge for me to try to see, like, can I name them off the top of my head? I don't know, go ahead, pause this episode, see if you can do it, challenge yourself. You have Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Guile, E Honda, Dalsim, Blanca, and Zangief. Those are the original 8. When it comes to the 4 Shadaloo bosses, they were computer-only characters in the original Street Fighter 2, but then they were added as playable in the Champion Edition. These would be Sagat, Balrog, Vega, and M. Bison. Now let's talk about that trio of Boxer, Claw, and Dictator. We're leaving Sagat out of this. Sagat is Sagat, and he's always Sagat. He's Ryu's rival. That's that. But when it comes to Boxer, Claw, and Dictator, these are names that are assumed around the world for these characters because in the original Japanese version, the Boxer character that Americans know as Balrog was named M. Bison over in Japan, as if he were a facsimile for one Mike Tyson. Similarly, Japan had what Americans know as Vega, named Balrog, as Claw, and then the Dictator was named Vega. Well, we now in America know it as M. Bison. So they were kind of shuffled around. So for Boxer, Claw, and Dictator over in Japan, it was M. Bison, Balrog, and Vega. But in the West, it would get shuffled around. So Boxer is Balrog, Vega is Claw, M. Bison is Dictator. A weird name, just to be like, oh, M. Bison is the big bad of this game, this Dictator. Okay, but that's the whole weird shuffle. So yeah, those are the 4 Shadaloo bosses.
There's also like a weird thing, and I don't know how much of this is hearsay, but I've read it a lot, that when the localization director looked at Vega or Claw, oh God, it's confusing even now. When the localization director looked at Claw, I believe his reaction was that this pretty boy should not have a name like Balrog, and that's why he ended up Vega. And it's too late to change it. It's one of like the most legendary, oh no, oh God, we screwed up. And it's too late to change it because these characters are already iconic, and we're never going to be able to like write our way out of it again.
Yeah, we can't put that toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah, it's already done. It's a fascinating story of like the olden days of localization. The only one that makes sense is that, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have called your black Boxer character M. Bison, but I believe the reason why they couldn't just change his name is because like the text was baked into the code essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And all they could do was shuffle them around. So
yeah.
It's just interesting. It's an interesting look into problems that do not exist anymore.
Absolutely. When it came to Super Street Fighter 2 and the 4 additional fighters that were added there, these would be Cammy, Fei Long, DJ, and T-Hawk. Why wasn't that an issue with Tony Hawk? Oh, right, that's because he's based on a Native American character, and it's not exactly a likeness problem. So, the hidden boss and secret character in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, of course, that would be Akuma. And then you get 3 character variants in Ultra Street Fighter 2 of Evil Ryu, Violent Ken, and Shin Akuma. Also, let's talk about how people for years pronounced that name of Ryu. Oh man, I hate that.
No, it's Ryu. Because dragon. That's what it is. Sorry, everybody. Or Ryu. Ryu is also acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but Ryu Hayabusa also, ouch. So, do you remember how it's all like Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2? What about the original Street Fighter? Well, yeah, that was a game, and it released for arcades in 1987. Although the original punching pad cabinet of Street Fighter had not been very popular, the alternate 6-button version was far more successful, which began to generate interest in a sequel. Capcom began to make fighting games a priority after the game Final Fight was commercially successful in the United States. Basically, the idea was, quote, "The basic idea at Capcom was to revive Street Fighter, a good game concept, to make it a better playing arcade game." The development of Street Fighter 2 took about 2 years, and it involved 30 to 40 people. The budget was estimated at roughly $2.45 million at the time. Producer Noritaka Funamitsu notes that the developers did not particularly prioritize Street Fighter 2's balance. He actually primarily ascribes the game's success to its appealing animation patterns. Several episodes ago, when we talked about Devil May Cry, we talked about how that juggling combo system was kind of discovered accidentally and kind of made into a core part of the series. Well, the same thing was the case with the combo system of adding additional hits before an opponent could respond in Street Fighter 2. It was a revolutionary bug that was initially observed during the car destruction bonus stage. And then they turned it into a key component, and fighting games were changed forever. At the time, reviews for the Super Nintendo port of Street Fighter 2 averaged out in about the 90s, the kind of mid-90s or so, but Game Rankings currently has it at 82% after some more contemporary look-back reviews, like when it released on Wii Virtual Console. Yeah, amazingly, the game did not hold up so well in 2007 compared to when it came out in the early 90s. Street Fighter 2 was Game of the Year, according to outlets such as Electronic Gaming Monthly, Game Informer, and more. In fact, in 2019, Game Informer ranked Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo as the 3rd best fighting game of all time. At number 1, they had Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, and Super Smash Bros. Melee was at number 2. By 1994, Street Fighter 2 had been played by at least 25 million people in the United States alone across arcades and homes. All versions of Street Fighter 2 are estimated to have grossed a total of $10.61 billion in revenue, and that would be mostly from the arcade market. Apparently, as of 2017, it is one of the top 3 highest grossing video games of all time, especially from that arcade market, which I guess I didn't fathom just how much money it brought in, because Space Invaders from 1978 and Pac-Man from 1980 are the top 2. As far as sales of home versions of all versions of Street Fighter, it all adds up to about 15.5 million units sold. In particular, more than 6.3 million Super Nintendo cartridges of the original Street Fighter 2 have been sold, making it the highest-selling third-party game on the platform. And, oh god, I mean, what is its legacy? I mean, talk about a whole franchise revival. Movies and TV shows, a whole competitive fighting game scene starting Evo, essentially. To quote from Wikipedia, quote, "Street Fighter 2 is regarded as one of the most influential video games of all time, and the most important fighting game in particular. The release of Street Fighter II in 1991 is often considered a revolutionary moment in the fighting game genre. It has the most accurate joystick and button scanning routine in the genre, allowing players to reliably execute multi-button special moves, and its graphics use Capcom's CPS arcade chipset, with highly detailed characters and stages. Whereas previous games allow players to combat a variety of computer-controlled fighters, Street Fighter II allows human combat. The popularity of Street Fighter II revitalized the arcade video game industry in the early 90s. It was responsible for introducing the combo mechanic, which came about when skilled players learned that they could combine several attacks with no time for the opponent to recover. Its success inspired a wave of other fighting games, which were initially often labeled as clones or imitators. So yeah, because of the person-to-person combat, really made it an arcade hit, and then even more so when it got brought to homes. I mean, it is one of those foundational games in the industry.
I'm mostly just kind of surprised at the statistic of it being like the highest selling third-party game on the SNES. Like, Final Fantasy was still on the SNES at that point. Mega Man was still on the SNES at that point. There were all these really big franchises, Dragon Quest even, and to find out that Street Fighter beat all of them, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So I quickly look up what did Final Fantasy VI sell on Super Nintendo, and it looks like about 3 million copies. So, I mean, 6.3, that's crazy. Bonkers. So, we've talked about Yoko Shimomura before on this show. We just referenced her earlier and how Live Alive was one of her first projects over at Square. Well, only a couple years earlier, she was over at Capcom, composing for Street Fighter II. And we've already talked about her on the show before. That was in our first episode. You talked about her for her work on Kingdom Hearts 2. So let's talk about one of the other composers on Street Fighter II, and that would be Isao Abe. Now, there is not much out there about Isao Abe. It seems that he is based in Osaka, Japan. He is also known as Oyaji, as far as when he was credited in those early video game days when you kind of wanted to hide your name out there. And he has a Twitter account that you can follow at ISAO ABE. Isao Abe has hardly tweeted. It's like he had his first tweet, and then it's like, it's been this long since I tweeted. It's been this long since I tweeted, and that's like it. So he does not have much of an online presence. His discography, though, he composed for Street Fighter II and games like Knights of the Round, The Punisher, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, which is a great video game title. Holy cow.
How have I never heard of that game?
It sounds amazing. X-Men Children of the Atom, Street Fighter Alpha, and Pocket Fighter. The last credit that he seemed to have, aside from being credited for different Street Fighter II re-releases and all that, was that he was a guitarist on Beautiful Joe 2 when that came out in 2004, but not much since then. He seems to be around, but I don't know how much he's doing as far as video game music work. So let's talk about the historical development research of the soundtrack for this game. And it's the big question, right? What are you going to do with Street Fighter 2? I mean, out of all of the ports, out of all the different versions of the soundtrack and how these classic tunes sound on different platforms, well, let's consult the 2015 album release of Street Fighter 2, The Definitive Soundtrack, which all it really includes is the CPS-1 and CPS-2 arcade release versions of the music. In fact, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate follows suit when it comes to Street Fighter music, noting these different character themes as Type A and Type B. Yes, Type A would be from the early CPS-1 games of the original Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 2 Turbo. But once you get into Super Street Fighter 2 and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, that would be the Type B CPS-2 versions. They sound better. I think they're generally more recognizable. Aside if you're talking about like the the old nostalgia, but when it comes to tracks like that Guile's theme, the best one is that CPS2 version, and so that's what we're going to be covering today on the show in our Critical 5. Before we get there, though, important to note that Yoko Shimomura composed almost all of the music in Street Fighter II, except for Isao Abe, who would compose Sagat's theme and the Versus and Here Comes a New Challenger jingles. Shimomura and Abe's compositions would carry over into Super Street Fighter II, with additional themes for the 4 new characters needing to be handled after Shimomura's move to Square. Isao Abe would compose DJ and T-Hawk's themes, while Seun Nishigaki would compose Kami, Fei Long, and Akuma's themes. Shimomura notes that game designer Akira Nishitani said he would come up to me and show me designs of the characters and explain the personalities of the characters and ask me to make theme songs for each character. I would look at the backgrounds and the character descriptions and all that, and I noticed that each character had a unique background. And because of that, I suggested making each theme song based on their background, country, and culture. It makes sense. They are world warriors. They have different backgrounds for sure. Interesting to note that the sound programming and the sound effects were overseen by Yoshihiro Sakaguchi, who was the composer on the original Street Fighter.
Hey.
So they still kept him around. All right, let's get to some of these classic fighting game character themes here on the Critical 5 for Super Street Fighter II Turbo. We have to start with the original. This is Ryu theme. It was interesting to see on the Hyper Street Fighter II Anniversary Edition music release, they gave titles to these different songs. And so, we're just saying like Ryu theme and all that because that's the title on the Street Fighter II, the Definitive Edition soundtrack. So I feel like that's what most people are going to know it as. But I feel like it's important to note the titles of these different tracks. And so for Ryu theme, it is also known as Reinterpretation, which I find that's interesting because this main theme for the main character of the series is generally often appropriated as the Street Fighter series theme, or at least it was in like Street Fighter 4 and going forward. So I feel like this is a classic melody, even when he was brought into Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS as a downloadable fighter. Like, Ryu's theme had to come with him. And so it's an iconic theme for Street Fighter. And you definitely hear these instruments on the CPS too. If you go back to the CPS one, it's just like it's cheaper instruments. It sounds like it's just not as good in full. But with these instruments on the CPS 2, for me, that's like how I identify and remember these Street Fighter songs, at least kind of starting out. And so there's a connection there for me, at least. And I feel like it's just the best. Granted, the 3DO versions also sound really good because it's like running on like a PC engine and all that, but not many people experienced that version. So I feel like this is the classic. This is the best version on what is the definitive soundtrack for the game.
And honestly, I think this is my favorite version of the song in general. The version in Marvel 3 is really, really good. The version in Smash is really, really good. I think I like this one the best overall, though. I don't know. I think that the bass comes through a little better in this version, if that makes sense, despite the fact that there isn't really a lot of bass coming out of this song.
Right.
But the instrument, not the frequency, essentially.
It's such a good one, though. And to continue that such a classic sort of feeling, let's get to number 2 on the Critical 5, and this is Chun-Li theme. This theme is titled as Street Market. That you get, street there in the title for Street Fighter. But this is the classic Chun-Li theme. It's this one. And again, you could go back to the older one and, the whole idea oh, she's from China. Let's add these kind of instruments that sound like they would come from there. I feel like that is, kind of exemplified better here. But yeah, just a classic theme that has the grace of her character, but also the strength of her character. And I think it's a good blend there. Recently, flipping through songs on Pandora, Nicki Minaj's Chun-Li came up. And that's right. She has a song called Chun-Li. And it was just interesting to think okay, there are parts of Nicki Minaj that are, large on her, and she is a presence as far as a woman in the rap industry, but you just got to think Chun-Li's thighs and how iconic those are.
Yeah, is she doing spinning bird kicks?
I think that'd be really cool. I haven't seen the music video, but I don't know.
If not, if there isn't a single spinning bird kick in that music video, then it should be deleted from the internet.
Right. So yeah, a classic theme, had to include this one here.
It is tied with Ryu's theme for my second favorite song on the soundtrack. We'll get to my favorite in a bit. But yeah, this song is really, really good. I think I feel the opposite about this one that I do Ryu's theme, which is every take of this theme after this just gets better and better. To bring up the Marvel 3 version. Wow, it's really good. I want to say there's a version in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, but I might be crazy.
I think you're right, yes.
But it's really, really good. I also agree that the instrumentation and personality comes out just a tad better in this version than the original. So, it's got that on it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's a theme you can't really mess up on future iterations, and I think you're right. This is a really good starting point. Other versions have done better, I think, but it's still a classic and a really great starting point here. Of course, had to include that theme because of what it means for also a playable female fighting game character. I mean, she was one of, if not the first, and so that's super important. But this is the theme. This is specifically the version that had to be in the 5 critical tracks for Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and it is the aforementioned Guile theme. After all, it goes with everything. Also has a title of Combat and Service. That's fitting for Guile.
Yeah.
It's this sound. It's the rockin' bass here, and that, really straightforward, but also deliberate pace. It's not, fast. It's not, energetic, anything like that, but it's patient. Guile is crouching, waiting for that flash kick moment to strike.
He sure is. As far as I'm aware, that's all you do if you are maining Guile? I don't actually know, but I assume that's the case. This is... If you've heard one song from Street Fighter 2, it's this one. This is the one you've heard. It's really good. It's very, very catchy. It is not my favorite, but it's up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like this is the one. If you've been around meme culture on the internet, it's definitely a big one. Number 4 on the Critical 5. This is a new addition to Super Street Fighter 2, so it's no CPS 1 version to compare it to. This is Cammy theme. Since this was composed after Yoko Shimomura had left for Square, this theme is composed by Suyun Nishigaki. It is titled Army Girl, and that's pretty fitting for Cammy. I think as a result, you can hear some similarities to like the overall pacing and kind of instruments that are like pretty similar with Guile's theme. But I like this one better. Like it's a melody that always stands out to me, and then I never really remember that it's for, oh yeah, Cammy, a character that I also like to fight as. So a theme that just stands out there. And I feel like if we were talking about the 4 new characters that are added, DJs is pretty cool. I do like DJs as well. So shouts out to Isao Abe for composing that one. But, you know, this one here, like I hear it and then it's like, oh yeah, I really like this one and had to include it.
This one's my favorite song of the game.
Yeah, good. I'm glad I picked it.
Yeah, bar none. It's super, super good. When we do talk about Street Fighter 4, I will be heavily bringing up Cammy's theme in that game too, because that version is the best version of this song. But this one in general, the original is really, really, really good. It's half the reason why I like playing as Cammy, because I get to hear this song. It's really good.
Absolutely. But we specifically discussed Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo to bring up this song to wrap up the Critical 5, and it would be Akuma theme. Oh, what a theme for the big bad, the big secret boss. And even when he's nerfed as a playable character, he's still the best character in the game. So much so that he's banned from competitive play. Akuma's theme is so good. There's just like a doom approaching with this one. And there's like, you can just almost feel like the power in the background with like the electric guitar just kind of like surging through it. You got that Satsui no Hado, like that dark power that he has. And wow, what a great theme to kind of wrap things up here on this Critical 5 for one of the original big secret characters in fighting games.
I'm sorry I keep bringing up versions of these songs from other games. It turns out these are all iconic themes that have shown up in a lot of other games. The version of this song from Marvel 3 is chef's kiss fantastic, but this one that one lacks something that this one has, which is specifically this sort of heavy tension of like Akuma just being around, and like some of it in the first half of the song feels a little bit like it's 2 different songs playing at the same time.
Yeah,
which gives it kind of a panicky mood to it. And I really, really dig that. Akuma is a super cool character, and his theme is very good.
Well, yeah, especially when you encounter him in the arcade mode, and you're supposed to fight M. Bison, supposed to fight Dictator, and he just shows up and wrecks him.
In one hit.
Yeah, and like, oh no, you're fighting me now. And so like, yeah, there is that kind of chaos, that fear, that looming presence. Oh, it's so good. All right, Joe, you got a couple tracks on the cutting room floor. Before I get to mine, hit me with yours.
Well, my first one is just, I think, another one of the coolest villain themes in the entire game, and that is Balrog's theme, Boxer's theme, Balrog's theme. This one's really weird to me, specifically because this doesn't sound like a villain song.
Yeah.
It's in like a major key, which is a bit weird, but also just sort of has this flashy thing of like, Balrog's a boxer. I think his entire backstory is he used to like fix boxing matches or something like that. I don't remember. But yeah, it's really, really weird, but I really dig this song a lot.
Again, making reference to the Street Fighter 4 version. This is one that's so good there, and it's really great to hear like the origins of it here. My bike money and all.
For my other one, it's another of the villain's themes. In fact, most of our Cutting Room Floor songs are villain themes. That happened on accident. It is Vega theme. Cloth Vega theme. This is one of those classic Yoko Shimomura tracks. I love the pace of this song so much. The Street Fighter V version of this song is fantastic. And also, Yoko Shimomura got to do a new remix of it for Smash Ultimate, which is super cool. And I really dig this song just in general, especially due to all of the places it goes.
Love how they try to emulate like the flamenco guitar here. It sounds so good and keeps that pace just pitch perfect.
Yeah. Street Fighter V having the acoustic guitar is, it's so good. It's such a good song.
Another track that was amazing in Street Fighter V, but also great to hear the origins here, is on my cutting room floor, and this is Ken Theme.
You heard it here first, everybody. Ken is the greatest villain of Street Fighter history.
Yes, that is what we meant when we said we're talking about villains on
He's rich, and that means the revolution will not spare him.
If you're interested, Boxer's theme, when it was named on the Hyper Street Fighter 2 soundtrack, was named Sexy Trunks. We're not talking about the Dragon Ball Z character and how he is. No, Sexy Trunks. Okay, that's for Boxer.
That checks out.
And then for Claw, it was Spittin' Narcissism. And
that also checks out.
Does check out. So for Ken, it's Made in the USA. No, we're not getting like a Bruce Springsteen weird different take on it, but I'm not going to say it's the Ken theme. You can imagine it mashed up with Paramore's Misery Business all you want to, but this is such a good theme. And again, yeah, it's amazing in Street Fighter V. But again, this is where it started. And, for the CPS2 version, sounds even better than the first one.
Yeah, it's really nuts to think about like how good this song sounds, even when it's not live instruments. Like, hot damn, Ken's theme is a classic for a reason.
It absolutely is. Like, I wanted to put it on the Critical 5, but too many bangers. And then one that I wasn't going to include, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I feel like we had to include it. It is Sagat theme. Sagat's theme is titled Sagat's Moon Bike. And, it's fine. It's not my favorite. But it is the theme that in the original Street Fighter 2, the one character theme that was composed by Isao Abe. And so I figure we had to at least include it here on the cutting room floor. And man, how good does that trumpet instrument sound for the early 90s on that arcade soundboard. I mean, it does sound like a trumpet MIDI for sure, but wow, for the time, that's really good.
I kind of agree that I'm not the biggest fan of this song. I think this is probably the weakest on here. But yeah, I'm noted trumpet MIDI snob Joe DeVader thinks that surprisingly this trumpet MIDI ain't bad.
So what will I never forget about Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo? Honestly, it's more of like how this series continued and the foundations that this game set for competitive fighting games in general. I was introduced to Street Fighter first, really, honestly, with 4. And so then to kind of work backwards and see the origins and like these themes that I loved in 4, but like are so good here. And then of course, the Guile theme, and it goes with everything on the internet, right? I feel like that's what I won't forget is like looking back to the origins of fighting games in general and how important this game is. Crazy history aside, with learning about all of the different versions and soundtrack. I mean, if you want to laugh, go listen to, some of the music from like all these different ports of Street Fighter 2. It's interesting and eye-opening, but when it's talking about the definitive soundtrack, you got the CPS 1, the CPS 2 versions. It's Type A and Type B on Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for a reason.
I think for the most part, I am also just because the first Street Fighter I ever played was 4, specifically Street Fighter 4 3D. It is super, super interesting to hear the originals and compare them to like how these themes have been adapted throughout the years. Not even just amongst the different versions of Street Fighter 2, but like amongst everything. When there's a crossover that Capcom's making with anything, Street Fighter characters show up and they usually bring their themes with them. And it's really neat to hear how they evolve from there. I also am never going to forget Polygon did a really, really, really interesting article where they went and tracked down like the people that made Street Fighter 2 and ask about like the entire development history. And it's long. It's like a 3-page article. But the story that I will never forget because it's weird is one from Yoko Shimomura when she was shown the design for Chun-Li. And I guess she commented on, those are some rather large thighs she has. The character designer apparently gave her a lecture about how sexy giant thighs are. And in the article, you can hear that she's laughing about it now, but you can definitely tell that back in the day, she probably didn't think it was very funny. A really, really weird story to come out of any of this, but like, that's what I think every time I think about Street Fighter 2.
I think that's a good way to wrap it up there. So to transition and talk about our next game, we like to highlight a fan cover, a fan remix, whether it's on YouTube, OC Remix, the makers behind the Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix soundtrack. So I was looking for Street Fighter 2 covers, and who did I stumble across but Fun 2? Fun 2! Yeah, the guy who played guitar on that original viral video on YouTube of Cannon Rock.
Mm-hmm.
Fun 2 did a Street Fighter 2 on guitar medley, and I just thought that was a really cool connection to like old internet. And here's his take specifically in this clip of course, Guile's theme. Hope you enjoy, and we'll be right back.
From one fighting game into another fighting game, let's talk about The King of Fighters 95, or KOF, 95 as it is regularly referred to, which is probably how I'm going to refer to it from now on. It originally released July 25th, 1995, shocker, in arcades, but it would see home releases on the Neo Geo AES and Neo Geo CD later that same year. I know what the AES is. I've never heard of a Neo Geo CD. I assume it's just a disc-based Neo Geo. I don't know. It would release on Sega Saturn, Game Boy, and PlayStation, which is just a hell of a combo of three systems to port this game to. Those would all come out in 1996. As we mentioned at the top of the show, the easiest way to play it nowadays is the Switch release in 2017. You can just buy it. It's like $8 regularly, and you can just play it. It was developed and published by SNK. It is a fighting game, the second game in SNK's crossover fighter series that began in 1994. Did you know that it's still called the King of Fighters 94, despite being the first King of Fighters game?
Yeah, that's a weird one.
I didn't know that. I assumed the first one was just called the King of Fighters, but no, there's a different game that this name comes from, and we'll get there. Much like Street Fighter II, King of Fighters 95 is a traditional fighting game. Moves can be activated through a series of inputs. These moves can be chained together for combos. When a character's health is fully depleted, they're knocked out, blah, blah, blah. And it also has, a super meter. Build it up, do super moves, etc., etc., etc. Where KOF really differentiates itself not just from other SNK fighting game franchises, of which they have a good chunk of, but also differentiates itself from other fighting games in general, like Street Fighter II, is that you don't pick a character to play as in King of Fighters. You pick a team of 3 characters to fight as. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, so it's like Marvel vs. Capcom. No, it is not. Before the match starts, each player chooses the order in which the characters will be used. You cannot tag characters out. They can be called in for assists, I believe only if you're losing, but you can't tag a character out and bring in a different character like you can in a tag fighter like Marvel. When one character has been knocked out, the next character in the team will jump in. Match ends when all 3 characters in a given team have been knocked out. So that's already really interesting and involves a lot more strategy just already off the bat. And characters can be selected in their predetermined teams, but one of the major additions that 95 added to the series was the ability to also make a custom team with 3 characters you want to play as in one group. In 94, it was, you pick the team that we made, and you'll like it.
Much better here in 95 then, yes.
Yes. So there are 8 teams present in 95. Japan team, made up of Kyo Kusanagi, Benimaru Nikaido, and Goro Daimon. These are original characters introduced in KOF 94. Kyo is actually the main character of the King of Fighters franchise. The Fatal Fury team, featuring Terry Bogard, Andy Bogard, and Joe Higashi, of course, from the first fighting game franchise that SNK started, Fatal Fury, which was called Fatal Fury King of Fighters. That's where it comes from. Art of Fighting team, featuring Ryo Sakazaki, Robert Garcia, and Takuma Sakazaki. These are characters from another SNK fighting game franchise, Art of Fighting. Ikari Warriors team, being Hydern, Ralph Jones, and Clark Still. These are characters that are actually from a top-down arcade shooter series that SNK also made at the time. Psycho Soldier team, being made up of Athena Asamiya, Sie Kenso, and Shin Gensai. These featuring characters from SNK's side-scrolling shooter series, Psycho Soldier. Korea team, being made of Kim Kapuan, Chong Kohan, and Choi Banj. which they're all original characters. One of them is, I don't remember which one, but he's the Freddy Krueger one you can see in the background of the Smash stage with like the clawed gloves. It's really weird, but that's him. There is what I think is the biggest cop-out, the Women Fighters team, made up of Yuri Sakazaki, Mai Shiranui, and King. Yuri and King are from Art of Fighting. Mai is originally from Fatal Fury. And the story of how this team ended up a thing was something along the lines of they just wanted King and they wanted to do an England team. And then management was like, no, you got to put in you got to put in Yuri. She's from Art of Fighting and she should be in there too. And then that made it weird when the third person was a guy. So they cut him and replaced him with Mai Shiranui. Really weird choice. And also really weird to think about the fact that I'm pretty sure there is only one other female fighter outside of that team, being Athena. And there is, of course, most importantly, the Rivals team, being made up of Iori Yagami, Billy Kane, and Eiji Kisaragi. Iori is actually an original character who was introduced in 95, while Billy is from Fatal Fury and Eiji is from Art of Fighting. There are also two boss characters, being Saisyu Kusanagi, who is Kyo's father, and Rugal Bernstein, who was the main antagonist of 94. So, there's a plot to King of Fighters, but I could not find anybody describing it in a way that made any sense whatsoever. The only thing that I could find was that this game started the Orochi arc. I don't know what that means, but there you go.
Sounds very Naruto, if you ask me.
It sounds really Naruto. Man, that series has just claimed ownership over the words Orochi, huh? Anyways, this is where I will ask, hey Peter, what are your experiences with the King of Fighters 95? Or honestly, any KOF game?
There isn't much. I do remember listening to your episode on Smasher Pieces, and that was really insightful, and it sounds like a fun game. Of course, there's also the story with its connections to Super Smash Brothers that I'm sure you'll get to. I knew about that. That's a fun story. And, you know, certain characters, like especially the connections to Fatal Fury, you do see Kyo Kusanagi on the different KOF fighting games since. I think I even saw some King of Fighters, probably 13, when I saw it, presents at EVO. And it looked really fun. Good time for sure. So, yeah, just another one of those series. I don't think as many people think of SNK and the fighting game standouts.
Also, King of Fighters 13 is still the game with the best looking pixel art of any fighting game ever made.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, it looks immaculate, which is really funny when you look at 14 and it does not look good. But the reason we're talking about King of Fighters 95 today is that this week, King of Fighters 15 is dropping. That's on February 17th, 2022. I figured, hey, why not bring the only one I've played? Because I've only played 95. Like you said, we did it for Smash to Pieces. It was the game representing Terry. And it's fun. It's a fun game. I kind of am interested in trying 15. There were a couple times where I almost bought 14 to try that out too. But I didn't end up doing that. And KOF is... You wouldn't know it here because I don't think it caught on as well here at all. But in Japan and in South America, funnily enough, King of Fighters and Fatal Fury and all that are wildly popular. Wildly popular. Apparently Brazil just has a bunch of KOF killers that live there. It's really interesting. It's one of those games where, like, I don't feel qualified to talk about it from a gameplay perspective, but looking from the outside in, it's really, really interesting. And I think the story of how the King of Fighters franchise came to be is also quite interesting, though there's not a lot of moving parts to it. So SNK actually first got into the fighting game scene with 1991's Fatal Fury, King of Fighters. Again, that was not a KOF game. That was a Fatal Fury game. I was confused as well. That game is notable, by the way, for being designed by Takashi Nishiyama, who had come over to SNK from Capcom after creating the original Street Fighter. In 1992, SNK released Art of Fighting, and then Samurai Showdown released in 1993, and of course there were Fatal Fury 2 and Art of Fighting 2 and all that came out. King of Fighters 94 actually didn't start its lifespan as a fighting game. It was a beat-em-up that was codenamed Survivor, and originally, with the location tests that they were doing during development, the two playable characters we know were going to be in there were Robert Garcia from Art of Fighting and Terry Bogard from Fatal Fury. And eventually, the beat-em-up concept just ended up dropped, but they had really, really attached themselves to the idea of crossing over Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury. They decided, yeah, you know what? No, this is something we do want to do. And so they agreed to just make it another fighting game, and then they brought in characters from other SNK properties like Psycho Soldier and Ikari Warriors. Samurai Showdown would show up in King of Fighters eventually, despite the fact that that doesn't make any sense, because Samurai Showdown takes place in the days of the samurai, but whatever. So they scrapped the beat-em-up, crossover fighter now. Kyo Kusanagi, who, as I said, is considered the main character of KOF, he was designed specifically to look like he could have come from either Fatal Fury or Art of Fighting, which I'm gonna be real, probably wasn't that hard. Those games are very similar in visuals. 95's development actually began directly as a result of the conception of Iori Yagami, because they wanted this character to be Kyo's rival. And during development, during location tests, Iori actually turned out to be like not only a favorite for players to play as, but the development team got really attached to him and he became a favorite of theirs as well. Originally in 95, Geese Howard, who is the main antagonist of Fatal Fury, was going to be playable, but he was removed. Late in development, early in development, it doesn't really specify. From the sound of what I was reading, he was actually supposed to be the first final boss, and then got replaced with a new character before release. I don't know the details on that, I couldn't find anything, but that's what it seemed like it was the case. So KOF 95 was incredibly well received and is often referred to as one of the best fighting games ever produced. The reason that we played it for Smasherpieces is because when Sakurai was talking about, hey, if you're going to play any of the King of Fighters games, which ones should you play? 95 was the first one that he mentioned. So yeah, needless to say, the arcade version, very well received. But the PlayStation version was not so lucky. Negative reviews pretty much across the board, if not middling. I think one of the sites gave it a 2 out of 5.
Oof.
People didn't like the PlayStation version. It didn't do great. But KOF 95 was explicitly the second most successful arcade release of September 1995. I would tell you what the first successful one was, but the citation that Wikipedia had for this fact was a magazine article from 1995 that does not load anymore. KOF 95 was actually one of the first games from SNK to be ported to the PlayStation, and this version actually added stage selection. Like, that was in addition to the game. It wasn't in there before.
Oh.
So that's interesting. And then, as stated before, though, the game was also ported to the Saturn. Didn't find anything interesting about that port, but the Game Boy version adds Samurai Showdown's Nakaruru as a secret character. I imagine this version probably sucked. I don't know about you, but the Game Boy is not the place I'm going to go for my fighting games. Hell, the Game Boy Advance isn't even where I'd want to go for my fighting games. This game would also be re-released on the Wii Virtual Console in April of 2010, but with two major changes, and I didn't know this. One, the original game features blood effects. Those are turned off. It should be noted the original arcade version also had an option for operators to turn off the blood. But also, Mai's assets don't react to gravity as much.
Super Smash Brothers is the boys for very good boys and girls.
So yeah, that's where it started. The signs were always there.
Come on, Nintendo.
I started losing my mind when I read that. Apparently, though, you can enter a code to reactivate both of these things.
Oh, well, good. Like,
so if you just want Mai to be a little bit bouncier, there you go. Congrats. I assume the Switch version has both of these on by default because I didn't read anything saying that it didn't. So KOF has deep roots in fighting games. It's ultra popular in Central and South America. It is directly inspirational for the creation of Super Smash Bros. 95 specifically. There is an article that Sakurai wrote, one of his columns essentially, where he talked about how way back in the day he was practicing combos in 95 and a couple came into the arcade and then he trashed this man, just absolutely destroyed him. And he started feeling bad because when he saw them leave, he kind of felt like he had ruined their date. And that is considered to be the inciting incident of Sakurai saying, you know, maybe fighting games should be accessible to everybody and not just veterans. Hence, Super Smash Brothers.
big fan of Iori, that Masahiro Sakurai.
Yeah. There was a KOF release of some kind every single year from 1994 to 2010. Every year. KOF 13 in 2010 was the last in this streak, and then the series would just sort of go away for 6 years. KOF 14 would come out in 2016, at which point people kind of complained about the ugly models. Not quite Marvel Infinite ugly, but not quite the best looking fighting game of all time, like 13 was considered around the same time. But KOF 15 now drops again this week on February 17th. And while Terry Bogard's inclusion in Super Smash Bros. Is officially considered Fatal Fury representation, like his icon and everything is that, his stage is specifically based on King of Fighters, and it features characters from across the KOF series in the background, except for Mai.
Yeah.
Because can't let the kids see that. I'll be real. I think it's stupid, but I can also 100% see where they're coming from. Mai's design is a lot.
Yeah, it's like, you know how we made Chun-Li's thighs big? Let's move that elsewhere on a woman's body.
And then also, she's barely wearing anything. Perfect.
And positioned specifically.
And also apparently is like super into Terry's brother. No. Music from KOF is also featured with Terry's DLC pack. So King of Fighters recently came back, but only enough to get 2 games. Terry has been in a bunch of stuff. Not just Smash, but he was also in that Fighting EX Layer game. He shows up in that. What was SNK Heroines? He's in that. What a game. There's also just a ton of like King of Fighters spin-off stuff. There's a rhythm game. announced like 3 years ago there was an otome game called King of Fighters for Girls. That is a real game that was actually announced with that real name. It hasn't come out yet. Honestly, if I had to take a guess, it's not gonna. What a terrible name for a game. For people that don't know, an otome game is basically a dating sim where you play as a girl trying to get with guys, essentially. So, let's talk about one of the composers that worked on King of Fighters 95. And by talk about him, I mean I have his alias, and that's literally all I've got. The composer's name is Akihiro Uchida, but he also goes by the aliases Aki, A-C-K-E-Y, all caps, or Aki, A-C-K-Y, written normally. Cool. He appears to have stopped being active in the industry around 2003. His last credit, as far as I can tell, both from Moby Games and VGMDB, that isn't like a re-release album that has some of his music on it. His last thing was around in 2003. In terms of his discography, all of the games he has worked on include Top Hunter, Roddy and Cathay. I don't know what that game is, but okay. In terms of KOF, he was on the sound team for 94, 95, 96, and 97. Samurai Showdown RPG features some of his music. I didn't know that was a thing, but apparently that's a thing. Real Bout Fatal Fury Special. He worked on The King of Fighters Kyo, which is a turn-based RPG about Kyo, which I also didn't know existed. He worked on Fatal Fury, Wild Ambition, and his last project in 2003 was the game Dolphin Blue. There are actually 5 composers that worked on 95, and I know what you're thinking. Why didn't you see which one had more information about them? Because they all have this amount of information about them. All of them, across the board. Obviously, you have Akihiro Uchida, who went by Aki, Masahiko Hataya, who goes by the moniker Papaya, all caps, Tate Norio, Brother Hige, and Pearl Sibakati. The VGMDB page for this soundtrack release is an absolute disaster. Like, to the point where it mentions who wrote 2 of the songs, which are on the outline here, and I will mention them. But then for one of them, it was like, they did this song and 5 others. No mention of what 5 others, literally just says, and 5 others. Never seen that on VGMDB before. Boy howdy. And this is also another one of those games where these tracks have multiple names they could be known by.
Oh, yes, fun.
Yeah, because Japanese, when they get translated into English, they get weird. The titles that I am going to be using are on the Spotify release that SNK themselves have put out, so I'm just going to assume those are actually the official English titles. So let's get in to those for our 5 critical tracks, the first of which is Selection of the Raging Billows. This is the character select screen music, which is why it is such a short, simple loop. You don't really need something very long when you're picking characters, but it is like weirdly catchy, despite the fact that you can hear it looping twice within like 10 seconds.
It's not, I'm going to take you for a ride, but
yeah,
it does get your head bopping though. A little, okay, electric guitar. I see you getting that little instrument in there. All right.
It definitely feels like it has that, you hear this like through the crowd in an arcade feel to it. This song is also known elsewhere as Raging Waves Select. Yeah. There's not a lot to say about this one. I feel like it is very important to put the character select screen here simply because it is kind of a bop. And also, like, this is the song you're going to hear before the fun really begins every single time. So I think it's neat.
When you have to pick your team of 3, yeah, you're probably going to spend a little more time than usual as opposed to just picking your one character for most other fighting games. So, yeah, no, it's a jammy little bop.
Yeah, again, no gonna take you for a ride, but really, what is a take you for a ride other than take you for a ride? Following that, critical track number 2, one of the stage songs, it is Ryo, Korea Stage. This is the Korea Forest Stage music, home of Korea Team, as you might have guessed. It is also referred to as Prisoner, because have I mentioned that Korea Team is made up of 3 convicted criminals?
We're just going to try not to read too much into that.
Yeah, you know. Anyways, I really like this song. I really, really like sort of the bells. I think that's what they're supposed to be.
The low instruments, yeah.
Yeah, like it gives this really, really interesting vibe to the whole thing. And I think this is one of my favorite songs, though not quite first place. But I remember hearing this while we talked about the game on Smash Pieces and really like kind of gravitating towards this song. So I figured it was a good idea to put it here.
I've heard of a lot of fighting game music before. Haven't heard anything from the King of Fighters 95, so interested going into this. What does it sound like? Oh, I didn't expect anything like this. This is an odd track. It sounds really interesting, but I wouldn't have pegged it as a fighting game stage theme.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know what I would... Maybe like a PS1 RPG?
Yeah.
Like an area song or something? Yeah, it definitely sounds very different from what you would expect from the genre, especially in that period of time. Following that, we have critical track number 3, Senritsu no Dora, China Stage. Or because nobody proofreads SNK's uploads, Chine Stage is how it's written on Spotify. But it's China. This is the home of Psycho Soldier Team. It is also referred to as Shuddering Gong. I think it sounds better in Japanese when I don't need to know that the word shuddering is in there. But I really, 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 really dig this song. It's got a lot of notes. It feels like it's taking a lot of cues from Chun-Li's theme in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's just because they're both pulling from the same sort of instrument source. But no, this song is really, really neat. I dig this song and its instruments a ton.
Yeah, once it really gets going, you definitely like appreciate all the layers it's trying to do. And this sounds more like a fighting game track. So
yeah.
I'm glad like it really gets into it. Yeah, I don't think it beats the classic nature of a Yoko Shimomura driven melody as she does, but I think this is still really good when it's trying to take the same sort of inspirations.
Yeah, I agree. Like Chun-Li's theme kind of beats this out being like of the same vibe, but I don't know. I think it does good on its own merits as well. Following that, it's probably the dumbest name of any of the things here. It's Bass Crawling on the Ground.
on New Baker Street.
What does that name mean? I don't know.
Or is it a bass? Are they talking about fish?
Who knows? This is the music for the Illusion Bar stage, which is located in England. It's the home of Team Women Fighters. I believe King owns the bar specifically. This is also referred to by the name of The Bass Crawls on the Earth, which is slightly better, but still doesn't make any sense. That being said, the fact that bass is present in this title is fitting because this song makes some good use of some bass. This song's just really groovy. I really, really dig it. It's the voice sample they use. I don't know what it's saying. It's weird, but I kind of dig it. I don't know. This isn't my favorite, but it's definitely probably a close second.
It does sound like the vocal sample does say bass, so it probably is referring to that. Plus, yeah, you mentioned the instrument. It definitely stands out there. I did not expect a vocal sample. I think that's interesting for sure. Would I have expected that this is the theme for the women fighters team? No, not necessarily, but it's a cool one. I think I like this one the most so far.
And for critical track number 5, this one is actually my favorite. It's Stormy Saxophone, American Factory Stage. You might have noticed that the last song didn't say where the stage was. It's the only one that doesn't. I don't know why. Oh well. This song, though, Stormy Saxophone, was composed by Tate Norio? I think? Again, the credits on the VGMDB page are a mess. Probably because the credits on the actual disc were a mess. It plays in the Abandoned Factory stage, which is located in New York. It is the home of rival teams, so this is Iori's home stage. And this song's just groovy. And that saxophone part, super simple, but really, really good. Like, this is by far my favorite song in the game.
Oh, yep. No, you're right. This is the best. I like this one a lot. It's interesting you mentioned it's the rival team. It makes me think of that bit in the Terry Bogard reveal trailer for Super Smash Brothers where they show Iori and it's a track of and it's like it's all saxy and jazzy like that. I don't know if it's this song, but like it's where Iori's laughing and all that. And he grabs the invitation and he misses. So it makes me think like there's an intended parallel there for sure. This is really neat. Wow, pretty good sax instrument again for the time. That's nice.
Yeah, it's obviously a MIDI. Obviously, even if you didn't know when this game came out, you can tell, but like rather surprisingly high-end MIDI of a sax. Good stuff. All right, I got 2 tracks on the cutting room floor. The first one has a great name. It is Funky Esaka, Japan Stage. Another song that's just decided to be just funky. That's the like sort of tone it's going for. I think this one was composed by Akihiro Uchida, so there you go. We might have gotten one of his songs in here. I don't know. This plays on the Osaka stage, which is home to Japan Team. Weirdly enough, the Fatal Fury team's home stage is the Mediterranean Sea. I'm not entirely sure why, But in case you were wondering where they live, apparently they live there. But yeah, this song is just it's groovy. It's got that really what kind of guitar do you call that?
A waka chicka waka chicka waka chicka.
Yeah, like I feel there's probably a term for it, but I can't think of what it would be. But it's used to great effect in this song in general.
More vocal samples too. Like, did Hideki Naganuma get inspiration from this song? You could tell me that he did, and I'd believe it.
I didn't make that connection, but yeah, this sounds very Naganuma-ish. This sounds like something that would have shown up in Jet Set Radio, honestly. And my second Cutting Room Floor track is not a stage track. It is one of the boss tracks. This is, and hopefully this is the name, because this is what it is everywhere else, Howl, Bass and Melody, Final Boss, Stage 1. More vocal samples, first of all, like radio chatter. The vibe that I've always gotten is that, like, oh, the police are circling in a helicopter and they're seeing this fight happen. This is the boss fight music for Kyo's dad, who is the first stage of the final boss. It's just good. I didn't see this when we played it for Smash to Pieces because we didn't touch this single player stuff. It was pretty much entirely multiplayer. But this song in general is just really good. Some places also call it Hall Bass and Melody. The VGMDB post has it as Hal, which is capital H-A-L, as in the 2001 character. And then Spotify has Hal, but it's written normally. So I don't know what this song is actually supposed to be called. So there you go. You have 3 names to pick from.
I think it's an important track to at least put on the cutting room floor here, though. I mean, when it's Kyo's dad and it's a final boss track, and it's got this kind of cool, dark, deep vibe to it. I agree. I kind of get that same sort of imagery, right, with the police chopper kind of circling around. That's a neat visual.
Mm-hmm. So what will I never forget about this game? I mean, Mai Shiranui's up there probably, but KOF is a really, really interesting franchise, especially in terms of how matches are structured. Because the team, I don't think there's any other game that does the team format in quite this same way. And I think that's really interesting. And it feels like, I don't know if Marvel, when did Marvel come out? Marvel 2. Specifically.
Marvel 2, I think it was 2000.
So this would have predated probably even Marvel 1. They were doing what feels almost like a prototype of Marvel in 94. And it's really, really neat. And I also think that like SNK has some very talented character designers on their side. And I feel like they weren't given as fair a shake as Capcom was over here, because Capcom, of course, yeah, they were doing arcade stuff, but also, you know, they had Mega Man, they had Breath of Fire, they had a bunch of stuff coming out on home consoles too, and SNK had the Neo Geo AES, but that was like a luxury item. Like, those things were crazy expensive, and so were the games. So they basically lived in arcades, and arcades died here in North America, honestly, pretty quickly. Within, like, by the end of the 90s, we didn't really have them anymore. They're still they're only just now getting a resurgence in the form of barcades around the country. So SNK didn't really get its fair shake. But yeah, I just think that it's a really, really interesting way for matches in a fighting game to be formatted. And I think that's the main thing I'm never going to forget. I might try King of Fighters 15. I don't know yet.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see what happens with KOF 15. And good to learn about the origins here. For reference, The Marvel vs. Capcom series started with X-Men vs. Street Fighter in 1996.
Oh, so this did predate the tag fighters.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's really neat to kind of see that all there. And a good episode to tie things together with Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo and the King of Fighters 95. It's not Evo, but, good to always talk about fighting games for sure, especially when you had this pegged for KOF. And I'm like, I think here's the time to talk about Street Fighter 2. So that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, and that's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasherpieces, is hosted, and you can find Smasherpieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed of podcast episodes, but we also have a Spotify playlist, where if we talk about a video game track on this show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to this big monster playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Both of these games are on Spotify. I'm really surprised that SNK's KOF catalog is on Spotify. I believe the Street Fighter 2 that Capcom has put up is the one we talked about today. We'll have to see. There's some version of Street Fighter 2's soundtrack on Spotify. That I can tell you for certain.
Mm-hmm. And that is pretty surprising. It's good to have, though. When you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with these episodes? Also, give us suggestions for games to cover in the future. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
Next week, I will be talking about Masanori Hirohara.
I will be talking about Hiroshige Tonomura. Oh, that's going to be a real good episode. I'm hyped about that one.
No clue how we're going to theme them, but
we'll find out. All right, Joe, let's play us out.
Obviously, if I'm going to be putting down a fan remix or cover of a song from this game, it's going to be Stormy Saxophone. Like, that's the one choice. And I happened to find a arrangement of Stormy Saxophone from YouTuber Nugem, Nugem, so Mugen backwards. I'm just now getting that, spelling it out.
Almost, but not exactly, yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, sorry. It's the nobody version without an X of Mugen. There we go. Saved it. He did a arrangement of Stormy Saxophone in the style of the SNES, as if the game got a Super Nintendo release, and it's kind of really good. So I hope y'all enjoy that.
Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.